That's something new they added. And I'm going to just throw everybody on mute. If there's anything urgent, you can throw in chat, and I'll try to see it on the other screen that I've got here. Or Carol will see it and come running down the hall and get me. So appreciate folks joining the World's Columbian Exposition. Somebody took me to task on Facebook, as people always will do. I didn't say in the description of it where it was. So for those that don't know it, it was in Chicago. It was actually in a part of Chicago that is, let's see, where is the Jackson Park, Chicago. So when this thing was built, that was a undeveloped area of Chicago, which these things often go in, as we said in prior talks, old rail yards or disused parts of cities. This was a very marshy, wet area that they decided they were going to do a bunch of landfill, create a World's Fair. And they had been in competition with other cities to do this particular World's Fair, New York being another runner-up, but finally Chicago got the award to do it. And the idea was to celebrate two things. One was the rebirth of Chicago after the Great Chicago Fire, and try to let people know that Chicago was still around, still on the map. And the theme they picked to celebrate was Columbus's trip to the New World, the 400th anniversary. That theoretically should have made it the 1892 World Columbian Exposition. But by the time they finally got this thing awarded and construction underway, it became apparent it wasn't going to be able to make an 1892 date. But to make it nice and formal, to formally celebrate the 400th anniversary, in October of 1982, they did a formal dedication of the site while it was still under active construction, and it ended up opening in 1893. So it was a pretty large undertaking. For those of us who are big fans of the 1964 World's Fair, by comparison, the 1964 World's Fair was 646 acres. The WCE was 690 acres. One of the things that's a big difference between the two, however, is the amount of empty space that was between buildings at New York was not the same situation for the Columbian Exposition, which was very heavily built out fair. And it also used massive structures. When we go through the pictures today, you'll see captions on some of them. And they proudly proclaim how this building took, 1.2 square miles of forest. They actually, I think, used the word deforestation, and twice the steel of the Brooklyn Bridge. So they went for giant exhibit halls. You don't go there for the most part and see a pavilion for a company. Companies tended to participate in a hall. So you'd have the mining hall, the leatherworking hall, other ones like that. You didn't have a GE pavilion, you didn't have a Ford, that sort of thing. So everybody went into giant buildings of similar, manufacturers gathered together. One other thing that makes this fair kind of fun to study is that this is the first fair that had international pavilions that stood on their own. So while they had manufacturing pavilions, in other World's Fairs, they had international pavilions. Here you actually had pavilions that were built by, say, Norway or by Sweden or by the UK, that sort of thing. So this was a real trend setter, groundbreaker in the thought of national pavilions. And we'll be looking at a number of those. The fair is generally known as the Great White City. Everybody probably remembers the book, The Devil in the White City, the maniac that built a torture chamber and killing house on the outskirts of Chicago. And people would go to Chicago, go to visit, stay at his place, and never be seen again. But it was called the White City because that was the major design that they went with, of white buildings that were made primarily out of plaster, cement, and something called jute fabric, a fabric that was mixed in there, so that it gave it an interesting texture, not a flat surface, but a kind of a texture surface that was designed to reflect incandescent light. And again, in today's day and age, we don't think much about these particular things, but they had just been a recent war between AC and DC current that they were all trying to say which was the right one, the best way to power cities and that sort of thing. The AC crowd won out, and there was a big bidding war underway now. Who is going to supply the power to the fair? So Westinghouse got into a war with General Electric. They had all sorts of different patents on light bulbs and what you could do. And if you research it, Westinghouse decided to underbid GE by 70 cents per light bulb. That's how they calculated how much this was going to cost to put this thing in place. So the fair was brilliantly lit at night, just like the San Francisco exposition. They put material into the walls that would reflect light back. And this was all done on temporary buildings that were done with this white cladding to give it this white glow as it went at night. Going to be jumping into and just see this some other night notes here. I found a few things that were interesting of it. Debuts at this particular World's Fair for those that are so inclined. It was the debut of Juicy Fruit Gum, Cream of Wheat, and Pabst Blue Ribbon Beer. It was also amazing to me the debut of the Pledge of Allegiance that was first performed here by a children's group that was gathered together. The pledge was a little different back then than it is now. They changed the words around a bit, but it was first publicly performed there. So what I've got today, obviously, I do not have any of my own photos from this particular fair, unlike my other talks. And there's very few amateur photography scenes available, but as we were chatting beforehand, this was a very well documented and very well photographed fair. Both Beth and I were holding up these giant books that we have of several hundred pages of photos from the fair. There were a number of companies that got it. They all got it as licensees from the Fair Corporation. And these books were very, very popular. What I'll be looking at today is photos that were done on a subscription basis. There were a number of companies that if you didn't want to go and buy the whole book all at once, you could basically buy a chapter at a time. And you would subscribe to these outfits. They would print up these photos. They would mail you. And the ones we're doing today, there were 16 pages in each of these chapters. And then every month, just like a magazine, instead of getting People Magazine or Sports Illustrated, in would come your magazine of pictures from the World's Fair. This particular one that I'll be starting with today was published after the fair ended. So a lot of the text in there talks about, the fair in past tense. Some of these are interesting to read. The editorial comments about this building was a failure. There are some comments you'll see that are absolutely, they'll make your skin crawl with their depiction of some of the people and particularly the natives that were brought over here from other countries put on display. So we'll be looking at that with a perspective of time today as opposed to the way they were written. So I'm going to jump over to the first picture, and it's interesting. I bought these a number of years ago, scanned them, and they've been sitting there in my to-do pile. But this first one, let me get here. It looks like we're looking at a real relic here, right? Luckily, only the first cover of this thing deteriorated, and we'll see some of the other covers that's in better shape. We'll also hear the dogs saying here too. Have to find a better way to schedule this. So anyway, let me close the door 1 second. No, it's that. They'll probably also bark when you let us know when our daughter gets here for lunch. So we'll just apologize in advance. But anyway, you can see this contains photographic views of the buildings and points of interest around the grounds. And then down here it says it's published weekly, comes out once a week. Was according to this, $15 or $25 a year to get the whole subscription. So we'll go in here. Second, I have to just. Okay, so we're going to go into take a look here at it. Here's the first page, and again, the first page of this book was a little damaged from the cover being so damaged. This gives you an idea of what the architecture of this particular fair looked like. As I mentioned, major difference with things like the '64 World's Fair, you did not have giant lawns, although it was a very nice island in here, cleverly called the Wooded Island. But this was all done in what they call the Beaux Arts School of Design or Architecture. And again, knowing we have somebody that studied architecture on the call, no pressure whatsoever. These books are great. They give you all sorts of information. For most of these pavilions, they give you an idea of how much the particular ones cost. So you can see the administration building here costs $450,000. In today's time, that's roughly about 12 to 13 million dollars. These were not inconsequential sums that were done at this point in time. I don't recall seeing a number of what the whole fair ended up costing to build. A lot of it was done by the exhibitors. Some of it was done by the Fair Corporation, which then subleased space out to people inside the other buildings. But unlike many other World's Fairs, this one actually turned a profit. It turned out to have 27 million people attend to it. And it's a very interesting situation when you stop and think about how hard it was for people to get to the Chicago World's Fair. Uh, there's one picture we'll see that they mentioned that due to the modern train system, it was possible to get from New York City to Chicago in only 20 hours now. So there was certainly no flying in. There was certainly no, transcontinental highways. As a matter of fact, as we look through this, we have to remember all these things that were built. This material had to be brought in by train or by very primitive trucks on very rough roads. And some of the state pavilions and that were very proud that they brought in timber from their state, stone from their state, minerals from their state. Just getting the stuff here to Chicago to build it was a tremendous effort. Mentioned the centerpiece of this particular fair was a design of a giant lagoon that was supposed to be representing the journey that Columbus took to the New World. So there were statues along it, different markers and things commemorating his particular trip. I don't think Columbus ever made it to Chicago, but it was a great thing for them to pick, a particular event or date that they could hang their hat on and give them a reason for having the fair. So again, a typical street, and they've already used the name White City. There was a name that became very popular with the press, and they publicized it all over the place. Again, no color photos exist from this particular fair because they had barely gotten photography going, and certainly no color photography. One thing about some of the scenes that you'll see is that it's sometimes a very interesting mixture of a real photo and sometimes things were added in by hand, because the film at this time needed such a large amount of light that when they got into certain areas, the people were blurred because they were moving or they were indoors and they didn't have a tremendous amount of light inside. So we'll see some cases in which the picture is a combination of a photograph and somebody's reconstructed artwork. So some of these are very large buildings that we mentioned. That they mentioned the foliage of the island here. That's the wooded island in the background. So Columbus was the big guy for this. We had the Columbian fountain here. These people, evidently Columbus, according to this version, must have gotten here by people with large oars that were going along. A lot of these fountains and or sculptures and that were done like in other World's Fairs. They were done in plaster or other materials to keep the cost down. There's an interesting story about all the ornamentation of the buildings. You can see that a lot of them were done with, again, wood facades covered in material to make them look like stone. But there was a lot of stone work and carvings that were done on it, and they were running into trouble on getting a lot of the detail work done. And the fellow that was the designer of it was asked, where are we going to get the bodies to do it? And he said, hire anybody you can. I don't care if they're white rabbits. Well, this was a tremendous thing for women artists at the time because a lot of their work was being held back. It was not viewed as good as the men. Well, now the women were all of a sudden hired in droves to come out and help finish the ornamentation and architecture in the buildings. And they very proudly started calling themselves the White Rabbits. So it became a mark of honor for a woman sculptor or stonemason or something later to proclaim that she was a white rabbit from Chicago. And again, some pretty good sized statues and everything. A lot of these, again, were done with gilding and that to make it look like they were metal sculptures. Some of the sculptures have survived. I've read that a number of them were relocated out to Denver, of all places. I don't know particularly which ones. but most of these things did not survive through time. Matter of fact, most of the buildings from the fair did not survive. They were all designed to be temporary buildings, other than the Palace of Fine Arts, which was the only fireproof building on the ground. And that proved to be a wonderful thing that they had decided to make sure the artwork was all secure in a fireproof building. Because not too long after the fair closed, the entire place burned down. There had been talk, the fair had been so successful and turned profit that there had been talk about saving a number of the buildings. And work was underway to see how much it would cost to put actual stone facades on some of the buildings, but that problem was taken care of when the entire place burned down, which meant very little of the fair was salvaged. And we'll talk about where some of the very few surviving pieces did end up. So Columbus was a big guy. He was the namesake of the fair, and quite a few different exhibits came and saluted him. This one kind of reminds me of the George Washington statue from the 39 New York World's Fair. That one being a much bigger representation of George than this was of Christopher. But again, they all went way out on building these particular things. It's hard to see, and if I zoom in on some of these, let's see if this works. Sorry. It's not working too easily to let me zoom this here as I'm sharing a window. Very interesting costumes in some of the people. You had a lot of the international exhibits were done by people from those countries, some of them that were expatriates to the US, but a lot of others came here. And in this particular case, there's two gentlemen in military garb that were from one of the other international pavilions. This is what I mentioned, the giant exhibit halls. This is the electricity building. These halls are absolutely immense. Somebody made the calculation that if you took all of the exhibit space at the 1964 World's Fair, it would have fit in two of the exhibit halls for the World's Columbian Exposition. And there were 12 major exhibition halls at the fair. So absolutely huge structures. You'll see in other pictures that they just stretch off seemingly to infinity, and all sorts of different things that were underway. Again, we take things granted for today, street lights. Well, street lights were very, very rare. There were still gas lamps in many cities. The idea of putting electric lights, and you can see there's some electric lights out in this particular building. General Electric in the background. You have all sorts of other electric companies showing how they made electricity, because most people had no idea and never seen a generator in action. But these exhibits were absolutely mind-boggling in the size of them. We'll see more as we get into some of the other buildings. Women's building is an interesting one for history. Again, it had all sorts of things that were of interest to women, but also had a bunch of things that were created by women. And one of the things that's interesting here is there had been a noted effort by the white backers of the fair to exclude the Black community from participating, which created, as you can imagine, some justifiable angst and anger. And there were all sorts of pamphlets passed out on the grounds and all throughout Chicago protesting that. Here inside the women's building was a large exhibit on African American art done by Black women artists. And it was the primary area at the fair where Black artists or people were represented, other than at some of the international exhibits, or they had a woman that was portraying Aunt Jemima, extolling the virtues of the pancake mix at one of the pavilions. So the women's pavilion was very well ahead of its time for equality there. Again, mentioned the states, there were 24, let me look at my notes here, sorry, 34 different states had their own exhibits. There were also, we'll see in a little while, 4 territories, some areas that like we know of today, states of things like Oklahoma were not states then, it was the Oklahoma Territory, and they participated. Again, look at the size of this building. This is all sorts of machinery. Back then, plows and threshers and all sorts of different odds and ends put in this building. But just the scope of this thing, how long far they stretch is just amazing. So this particular one was $1.2 million. In today's dollars, it'd be about $40 million to build it. Again, $40 million is theoretically not that much money today, but when you consider what the average person was making back at this point in time, this was a huge expense. The fact that the fair could actually turn a profit on this because they rented space out here to all the companies really showed how popular it was, both to exhibit and to to attend. This particular one is interesting. If you try to search for it under the word Houden, you won't have much luck because they didn't quite get it right. It's the Ho-Oden, the proper Japanese wording of it. But this was a temple that was built over in Japan, brought over here with materials assembled in Chicago. That was the case with many of the international pavilions. They were actually built overseas, taken apart, brought over here, and put back together. Down at the bottom here, it says the building has been presented to the city of Chicago. Well, that's great, except when the fair burned down, it managed to burn down. This was out on the wooded island. After it burned down, the building was gone. They put in a Japanese themed garden, which was heavily vandalized during World War II. I believe there's a garden out there now that has been redone since this point in time. But I would hope when they say here that they have contents of native works of arts and curios, I would hope most of the buildings had been empty by then, by the time that the whole thing burned down. But trying to find out where some of the exhibits went is a little on the tough side. Horticultural building, giant greenhouse type facility, bringing in plants from all around the world, not just from the United States. And we'll be talking more a little bit some of the horticultural issues that people got. And Pennsylvania, looking very much like Independence Hall. They had some exhibits there about the history of Pennsylvania and celebrating Ben Franklin and his great contribution to American history. Again, the agriculture pavilion. You can see all sorts of different boats out on the water. Very popular were gondolas that looked like they would have been right at home in Venice. They also, we'll see in other pictures, they had boat races out there. What's interesting with this picture, if you look at it, and you can see my mouse moving around here, this particular street light, if you look at the original picture, for some reason, an artist rebuilt this street light. So I don't know if somebody was passing in front of it as a blur, but that's the sort of thing they did with their photography back then. So you have one street light here, which is real, and then this other one here, I guess the top is real, and down at the bottom, it's a artist reconstruction. We're visiting the state of Kentucky here, and again, most of these had exhibits inside of the history of the state, but a lot of them had exhibits inside of why you would want to come to Kentucky to do business. Not so much in tourism, because tourism in 1893 was not a huge business in the United States. People tended not to take 20-hour train rides just to go to another city for the sake of seeing another city. So you didn't get a lot going in here on why you would want to come into Kentucky and stay in Kentucky. It was more what could Kentucky sell you, and he mentions right here local industry and art, different things that you could do and come in. A lot of these buildings also had restaurants. It was very popular that you could come in and get the food of a particular state, particularly the states that dealt in things like seafood and that were novelties to some parts of the country. So other fairs had things like the Eiffel Tower being the theme structure for the exhibition in Paris. Here, the Great Basin, the water area was the theme design, the marquee for the fair. What became better known than the Great Basin was the Ferris wheel. We'll be seeing a little bit more. But this gives you an idea, again, how large this particular area was to go walking around, and how long it would take to cover the grounds. I'll jump over in a second to the next flyer. So again, that's what you would have gotten in 1 week, and you would have been real excited. And now the next week you would come to another exhibition here. And this tells us a little bit more. It's the cover is less destroyed, but this is the November edition that comes out. Rand McNally, the famous map makers and stuff, publish this. And we're going to be taking a look around here. Sorry, somebody keeps having connection issues and popping up and going away and popping up and going away. So hopefully she'll be with us here or back. So it's interesting here that you have all these great buildings, and they were all mixed around with no particular design. We did not have things like the international zone. You did not have the lake amusement area, although there was a amusement area we'll get to in a little bit. But you would have all of a sudden, Brazil, which is popped up next to a bunch of other particular pavilions that may have been for a business or industry. So things were a little scattered around. We saw it before. We saw the inside of the electricity building. Here's the outside. This fountain in the front, the Columbian fountain, was built as the world's largest fountain at the time. I think in another picture it tells us the details. It was something like 50 something feet across. So they really went all out. Of course, if you're going to build a fair, superlatives are good. So if you have the biggest, the largest, the tallest, the fastest, or whatever. But again, it's such a shame that so many of these things were destroyed, because a fire would have destroyed the particular buildings. But things like this fountain should have survived. But they were all done as temporary structures. Again, another view of the electricity building. They went for, if people look at this compared to a lot of more modern fairs, one thing that's very interesting is all the windows and glass space that's available in these buildings. Because where a lot of the fairs, if you look at, say, again, the 64, 39 fairs, the buildings are done with very small amount of windows because they wanted to maximize the amount of space inside. They went for a different approach here because they wanted to maximize the amount of light that could get inside. And they also were not squeezed for exhibit space because these pavilions were so massive on their own. And again, another view looking inside. So we have an exhibit right here in the front of a lens from a lighthouse up there with a giant Fresnel lens. It's going to be 200,000 horsepower. This is the France section. So these are all French electrical companies. If you went down, you had German electrical companies, Spanish, English, all over the place. Everybody trying to get you to buy their particular electrical gear and to install it in your businesses here in the United States. Again, you can, as you get back here, some of it starts becoming more of an artist rendition because, frankly, there was no photography available, the light to get all the way back here to the background. The Columbian fountain, again, some of these people are very well known. Frederick MacMonnies, he did a number of the fountains here for the fair. He'd also done the giant Columbian fountain. The one I mentioned was 50 something feet across. And unfortunately, these did not survive. There is the Japanese pavilion out in the center of the wooded island bridge over there, connecting it out there. And a good idea of the background is just how large these these buildings were. These captions in here, if you read them all, they really give you a lot of detail exactly how big they were, a lot of superlatives. That this the manufacturing Little Ross building is only 11 feet lower than the Bunker Hill Monument in Boston. I don't know why that particularly matters to anything, but it's the sort of thing, factoids that people just ate up. Iowa building took an existing building that was already in the site, and they added out to it, put on some extra dining rooms and exhibit halls. In the most of these, as I mentioned, they had restaurants, things that come in, because they would like to have come in and wine and dine you on why you should be relocating your business to Iowa or to buy your materials from there. The horticultural building, again, huge greenhouse. You look at the size of that dome up there in the center. Some of these things are interesting. People would buy the particular buildings or structures after the fair ended, and not because they wanted the building, but they wanted the raw materials, so that some of these things, the steelwork of buildings here became steelworks of other buildings that today don't bear any resemblance to the fair structures, but they would happen to be the right size steel girders or beams, that sort of thing. Set of statues, you have this woman here, the statue of the bull, and the other side is a cowboy and a horse. Actually, I don't know, as a cowboy, is a farmer and a horse. I believe we'll see him going on through. So lots of artwork and things scattered around the grounds. Kind of interesting here again. They went through mostly the designs were all done with this faux art style. Then in different places, people said, no, I'd rather have my design stand out from the others, and I'm going to have the Gothic design here for the state of Indiana. By the way, I've not yet had the time to fully restore some of these pictures and adjust the contrast and brightness on them. This is the way they held up. They were done on very fine paper. As you can see, the paper is not turning brown. It's really looking very good over time. So Rand McNally really did a very nice job of printing the albums. The cover papers are very brittle and fall apart just by touching them, as you saw in the first part. But the interior pages of these things were very, very well done. This was from the Mines and Mining Building. We'll be seeing more mining, a huge industry back at that point in time. And, you know, the demand for natural resources was just insatiable, trying to get copper ore, you know, iron ore, that sort of thing. So mining was a huge part of the American industrial complex at that point in time. You know, left some terrible scars across the environment, but it was definitely a up and coming industry. This is interesting here, Pennsylvania Railroad. Railroad, as I mentioned, was the major way that most people got to the World's Fair. They built a giant rail complex out here at the fair, which actually had 26 different tracks running into it. So you could get on a Pennsylvania Railroad train in New York or New Jersey, that sort of thing, ride there in comfort for your 20 hours and arrive at right at the World's Fair. Now that's great, except you got your luggage and everything, so that you really want to, you know, haul that around. But they had companies that would then take your stuff to your hotel and put you there. Or you could also take a train into Union Station in Chicago, and they built a specific rail line that ran all the way out to the fairgrounds that would just be used for local people or people staying in the city of Chicago to get back out to the fair. But it was a massive station. We'll see some pictures of it. 26 tracks is just, you know, it's bigger than anything you can imagine in any rail system that exists in the States today. They also brought a lot of trains in. They were very proud of this one. The John Bull was a first train that ran in 1831. It was an American train, ran on the Camden and Amboy Railroad. And it was the first train acquired by the Smithsonian Institution, which here it mentions the National Museum of Science. It's actually owned by the Smithsonian. But they fired this thing up and they brought it under its own steam up from Washington, D.C., chugged all the way up to Chicago for the exhibit, put it on display, and then at the end of it, they fired it up and trucked it all the way back down to Washington, D.C. again. So they're very proud at this point by things like the famous Pullman cars and the other ways that you could travel. And they're mentioning here on, you know, what a magnificent train they have now and how lucky they are. And they mentioned here in 20 hours, one can be rushed from New York to the White City with all the comforts of a first-class modern hotel. So they had a lot of modern trains on display, but they also had a couple of these antiques. And unlike other fairs where they displayed a lot of recreations of trains, they actually had the real McCoy here at this particular one. The Bureau of Public Comfort, my first thought was, oh, a giant restroom facility. No, this is where you can come in and rest. And it was the information center of the fair. So you come in and get information on particular exhibits, and they would also give you information on, you know, places to stay, things along that line. So we'll hop along here. Again, for Jim Brown was mentioning it's a hot day and he wanted water. So there was a lot of water here. This was all built on the shore of the lake. They had this giant lagoon out here. So in some shots you see pictures of the lake, others of the lagoon. I mentioned here you had gondolas. You had electric powered launches, which were kind of interesting that they had battery powered boats that would take people out here. But they also had small steam launches that would carry around. Most of it was done, how you can see one of the steam launches right here in the center. Most of it was done by people rowing you around, and we'll see different sorts of the boats at the time. State of Utah was one of the ones that brought a lot of stuff out from their particular state. A lot of these places did things like bricks and stonework. They did not bring the entire building out, and this again would be a white building done with the temporary facades in it, but they would have enough brickwork or ornamental ironwork or other parts of it that were brought from out back home to show you how great their craftsmen and workers were. I'll jump over to the next of these folders. Okay. So mines and mining, I mentioned a huge industry at this point in time. And again, you can see how big the building is, all the tremendous use of window space getting in here. So all sorts of stuff inside that would show you how this stuff was done. What's interesting is that not only did the machinery sit there, but in a number of these pavilions, the machinery actually worked. Particularly, we'll get to the leatherworking pavilion, go through that. But they would show you how some of this stuff worked, and you can imagine if they fired up a rock crusher or things along that line, it would be a just great exhibit to be inside. But a lot of the stuff, the belts turned and the machinery worked, and whether or not they were actually crushing rocks, the things that thunder and roar and give you the impression of the power and immense capacity that American or international industry had created. The fisheries building is very interesting. Fishing being a huge industry back at that point in time, the idea of trying to do fish farms was far off in the future. So this was mostly go off and set up giant fishing fleets to go out and out in either lakes or out in the ocean to do it. There's another competing set of albums like this, and I think I have one of the fishing pavilion shots in that, where the fellow says he just didn't understand the design of this and how it involve fishing, and I don't know if he was envisioning a giant fish-shaped building or something, but I don't know why he felt that this was a poor representation of fishing. It's, to me, it was a perfectly fine building. State of Ohio, again, just like many of the others, they brought in stuff from home. In some cases, they copied famous statues that were back in the home states, made duplicates of them here. In some cases, they commissioned statues that were shown first at the exposition and then relocated back to the particular state to do it. In the background, the big building with the flag there is the Michigan Pavilion. I got a kick out of this one. If you look at the flagpole in the center is a giant American eagle, which looks very much like the eagles at the World's Fair in done for 39 that are still at the 64 site in New York today. Here he had 3 ships they rebuilt. They brought them over in Spain and brought them here, supposedly using the actual plans for the Nina, Pinta, and the Santa Maria. There's 2 of them here. They were paid for by the U.S. government, done in a Spanish shipyard. 2 of them shown here, and it mentions the Santa Maria, the third and principal vessel, is the subject of another illustration. Well, it's actually interesting. These boats, I don't know what happened to the Nina and the Pinta, but the Santa Maria, for a long, long time, was in the marina that was built at the site of the World's Fair. And it was on display for years and years and years. Finally, it fell into disarray, was allowed to sink at its docks, succumb into the ages of time. And in 1952, people decided, hey, this is blocking a valuable part of the marina. Let's dredge it up and haul away the wreckage. So kind of interesting that, 1893, this was on display. And in, 1952, they finally got around to getting it off the site. I have not yet found out whatever became of the other 2 ships. And another view of the Columbia Fountain. Forestry Pavilion. This is kind of interesting. Great display of forest, and it was actually interesting. In one of the pavilions, they mentioned how some of the states had such tremendous forestry products that their trees were so big they couldn't get the logs to the World's Fair because the railroads of the time could not handle things of that size. Today, it's become very interesting when people try to get a mast. They're trying to redo a tall ship. They try to find wood to redo a mast. Trying to find some of that is so hard these days because everybody did so much in terms of just deforesting things and cutting these things down. But huge building, of course, made out of wood. Another one of these things they talk about how many shingles and everything were here. What's interesting here is that this whole thing was done with wood pegs, and they proudly note that a single nail or piece of metal was used in its construction. Now, personally, I view that there's probably a nail in there somewhere holding the shingles to the roof or whatever, but I guess it was a very big point of pride to them. Regatta days, they had a bunch of these, and you could come out and you could watch people to go out on the lagoon. And mentioned in other fairs, at times they would do things with friendly rivalries. The mayor of one city would challenge the mayor of another city. I can outrace your butt across the lagoon, or the Lions Club may try to be better than the Kiwanis, that sort of thing. So people would line up and they would have these races, and you could see all sorts of different events. What's interesting here, the second one from the left, where my mouse is circling around, it was a bicycle on a boat bicycle that you would actually get out there, sort of like a paddle boat that you would have today, but you were sitting high up out of the water, paddling away, and a little paddle wheel would take the boat out there. So you see again boats here with oars coming outside, gondolas, steam launches. Going out and watching people out with their races on the lagoon was a very popular event. Another train, the DeWitt Clinton, came out of the New York Central Railroad. Again, look at the coaches that people rode in back then. A little more than a stagecoach on metal wheels that were attached to the engine. But again, this particular engine was the real McCoy. I don't know if this one came here under its own power or not, but it's very amazing that this was only 62 years old at the time of the fair, and trains had changed amazingly during the point in 62 years, just like you saw how much aviation changed in its first 62 years. Tribute to Columbus here, convent of La Rabida, built with a lot of the same sort of materials and everything that it would have been built back in Spain. Did not fit at all into the other designs of the the buildings, the Great White Way, sort of thing. But again, it was done to celebrate Columbus and his theme. And supposedly full of all sorts of great relics and artifacts from him, hopefully all returned to Spain before it burned down. Transportation Pavilion, again, it's hard to believe back then we weren't driving around in Fords or Itzels or whatever. The big thing back then was still horse-drawn carriages, trolley cars, trains, that sort of thing. Those are the primary things that were done in the transportation building. Why you would come and go and buy your streetcar system from this company, your tram system from that company, all sorts of things. So this is a very industrial display, not much oriented towards the end consumer, unless you wanted to go see the latest things in horse-drawn carriages and farm wagons. Another view of the Japanese pavilion out on the wooded island, some of the launches down below. Again, if you look at it closely, they're artist representations of them. Fishing pavilion, again, that other picture didn't really give you the impression of size. The other one basically just covered this area here. Giant wings on either side of it that stretched out, all sorts of tanks, a giant aquarium about fishing and how they're all being studied and analyzed, and how fishing was becoming a science as opposed to just brute labor. Kind of interesting design. We switched from a very industrial brute sort of design. We hop over to Sweden. This is, again, is one of the ones mentioned. It was built in Sweden, taken apart, put back over here, put it back together, and went on display. I tried to find out what happened to this particular pavilion. I had not had a lot of luck. I don't know if it was taken back home, but it doesn't show as being a surviving structure. But a large window area up here, so very, very interesting design. Wisconsin brought over a bunch of stonework. You can see down below here, and again, that's what I mentioned. They would bring over pieces of it from their countries and or states and assemble these things here. But it was cheaper in a lot of cases to use Chicago-based laborers to build it. In some cases, they actually sent people in, mostly from the foreign countries, figuring that they didn't have the same skills to build a Swedish pavilion or a Norwegian pavilion. So people actually came all the way here to do it. In some of these cases, it was cheaper to hire a foreman to come in from Wisconsin, and the guy swinging the nails could be done much cheaper from Chicago. Inside the agriculture pavilion, again, huge displays, and these pavilions, as you can see, were multi-level, generally two, I think, well, a couple of them might have been three levels, but just exhibit after exhibit after exhibit, all done with this sort of things, giant skylight up ahead. But rather than finishing the whole second floor all the way across and making it very dark down below, they did as much as they could with natural light to take advantage of it. Because the light bulbs at the time, Westinghouse found out that they had severely underbuilt, bid the contract, since the light bulbs wore out much faster than they had anticipated that they would, leaving them on as many hours a day as they did. So they had an entire crew of Westinghouse people who would go through the fairgrounds every night doing nothing other than switching out light bulbs. But again, down below, all sorts of displays from different companies. Then we get to the Ferris wheel, debuted at the fair. Mr. Ferris was a much better engineer than he was a businessman. This was very, very popular at the fair. There were 34 gondolas on it. It hold 2,160 people, actually 36 cars on it. 2,160 people at a time could ride on it. And for many people, this was the highest they'd ever been off the planet Earth. There were very few buildings that were this tall that most people had been at. There was certainly, people weren't riding around airplanes. They might have been in a hot air balloon or something. But this was a revolutionary thing to go on this particular ride. Very, very popular. Ferris, unfortunately, didn't do a very good job with patenting some of it or licensing it. He died a pauper. Ferris wheels built all over the place with the name Ferris, but with no actual tie to the company. After the fair ended, this was taken apart and reassembled in another part of Chicago and ran for about 2 years. But it was not a giant financial success then because it didn't have as many people coming from around the world because the fair was gone. And once you'd ridden it in Chicago, that was probably enough for a while, and it just didn't have the traction to keep it going. It was taken apart and was brought to St. Louis, Missouri for the 1904 World's Fair. Proved to be very popular there. Excuse me. And there was a lot of talk about what to do with it after that fair. Well, nobody decided to buy it, so they decided to do a controlled implosion of it in St. Louis. And it was supposed to gracefully fall over on its side, and instead it fell in a giant pile of metal. There was one guy who was very proud. He had bought some of the cars off this thing, not because he wanted to build his own Ferris wheel, but he thought, wow, what a great greenhouse I can build for my property. And he was able to use all the glass out of these glass enclosed cars and the metal to build a giant greenhouse. The axle for the, they cut up the wreckage that was lying there in St. Louis, but the axle that you can see right here in the middle was the largest single piece of steel that had been forged by man at that time. And when they went to cut up the axle to get rid of it, they found that they did not have any torches that were sufficiently hot enough to cut the axle apart, that no matter what they tried to do, the heat would diffuse from where they were trying to cut it and would go into other parts of the axle. So the axle ended up being very, very hot and not getting cut into pieces. So they finally decided, how do you get rid of this? They took it over to a marshy area, dropped it into a giant swampy bog in St. Louis, which over the years got filled in, paved over. And a number of years ago, people said, oh, whatever happened to that axle? The newspapers said it was dropped there. They went out with magnetometers and they were able to find out where the axle is, and it still lies underneath the street in St. Louis today. So one piece of the fair that did survive destruction, sort of survived destruction. Okay. There we go. Sometimes there's a little lag between when I see it. I'm looking at my second monitors to see when things do pop up. So another nice view of the fairgrounds. You could see, as I mentioned, they were not particularly green, a lot of green space in between the buildings. There was a lot of sidewalks and everything connecting it, but they had enough green around the lagoon and everything to try to help a bit with the heat and everything that all the pavement would draw off. But the major impetus here was on buildings, not on green space, other than the wooded island. And again, nice view of the island right there. You can see some of the various boats going around. Look at the size of that hall in the background, though. That's just the corner of the Manufacturing and Liberal Arts building. I mean, absolutely huge structures. This is kind of interesting. It's part of the Pennsylvania Railroad exhibit. The Krupp gun was the biggest cannon built at that point in time by Krupp, who was the wealthiest man in Germany. He built this gun, and it had a range of 16 miles, which is astonishing cannon fire. He built it and brought it over here as a favor to the head of Germany at the time, and it cost, I think it was $500,000 to build his building at the fair, which would be $16 million today to build it. But the Kaiser, Germany had its own exhibit, but Krupp was very, very well known, and they wanted to show German industrial might. This is a replica of the gun. This was a special carriage that they built. The gun was brought over from Germany on ship, unloaded in New York Central or Pennsylvania Railroad rather, brought it out here on this giant carriage. The actual gun was taken off this carriage and put on display inside the Krupp building, but the railroad wanted to tout out, if you build something really, really big, we can get it from here to there for you. Evidently, unless it was a giant tree, but they built this gun on it. So the station we saw before, this is the Pennsylvania Railroad Pavilion in the background there. Inside, you had all sorts of exhibits of different pavilions. Some had actual animals on them. Here, these guys are happily just stuffed animals. You can see up above that Michigan is the place if you want to go and buy a water buffalo, which I don't know how much of an industry there was in selling water buffalo, but there must have been enough of one that people felt free to have an exhibit at the fair. Again, the fountain I mentioned here, largest fountain in the world at the time. This fellow did several different fountains for it, and I have not found any record of any pieces of it surviving. Kind of hoping that some of it had. They raised it up off the ground so that besides just having a giant fountain, they made sure it was cascading down 12 feet of water coming down at all times. New York State, for those of us from New York, this doesn't particularly look like a New York State style of architecture, but they went for this particular look. They had honors of the first and the then current governor of the state, and different things all filigreed and done with New York artisans and brought out. Massachusetts, another state pavilion went with a very different look, more of a colonial design look for it. It's very interesting to see how some of the states went for a very more modern look, and others modern for the time, of course, 1893, but others went right back to colonial times. U.S. government pavilion in the background, topped by giant eagles on various sizes, a giant dome reminiscent of the Capitol Dome in D.C. The U.S. government, every agency that participated in the United States government at that time had a display here trying to tell you where your tax dollars were at work. California done more in a mission sort of style. Again, 34 different states participating, people trying to get you to come out here. California did have an element of tourism display in its pavilion, trying to get you to come out here because of all of our land of sunshine and all the get away from your winters, come out here and smell the oranges growing, that sort of thing. But again, most of it was on the fact that we could supply your farm needs, your food needs, your agriculture needs, and we also have a tremendous amount of industry out here that can build things for you. New Hampshire Pavilion, again, looks like it mentions here, looks like balconied chalets of Switzerland, symbolizing the Switzerland of America, as New Hampshire is often called. Now, by a show of hands, has anybody ever heard New Hampshire called the Switzerland of America? Yeah, I see some shaking of heads. Until I read this, I never thought of it. I always thought of it as the icebox of America, because it can get damn cold in New Hampshire in winter. But I never thought of it as being Switzerland. So it's kind of fun. You read these and you learn some different things. And I saw Glenn Barker joined us. Congratulate Glenn on being a repeat grandfather. Excuse me. So Glenn,
thank you, Bill.
Oh, great. he gave us a bad pun last week, so let's ask if you have any puns for this one for the cart before the horse, Glenn. So, but this is the cart horse group. So it's I don't know who came first, the cart or the horse, but I get a kick out of here that both the man and the horse are splendid specimens of their kind. The American farmer plowing the farm fields out there. So he is out there plowing away. This is interesting. Canadian Pavilion had absolutely no exhibits inside whatsoever that you would come to look at. It was purely there for Canadians to come and rest, or actually more likely to come there and talk about people coming to do deals with Canada. So it says, you see down below, the building contained no exhibits, being used entirely for official purposes and a meeting place. And you just wonder how popular the building was if you got there and there was absolutely nothing to see there. But they got to spend $30,000 so they could have a clubhouse so all the Canadians could come there and go, hey, what? Oh, territory. Again, Oklahoma, Arizona, New Mexico were not states at this point in time. It's hard to relate to, but there were still the wild territories, and they 4 different territories exhibited here. And you could come out here and find out all the things that were out there for the land that was available. Still a tremendous amount of space that was available for purchase, coming out and relocating, growing farms. So New Mexico, Arizona had a lot about minerals, and Oklahoma, not being particularly mineral rich, had a big thing about grass and other agricultural products that you could go and buy. North Dakota, I got a real kick out of this particular one, talking about how you come out here and see the products that were grown in the temperate zone. Again, I've never thought of North Dakota as having a particularly temperate zone. I guess that means less cold and less frigid than other parts of the state, because every time I've been to North Dakota, it's been pretty darn chilly. But again, a very impressive stone building with a lot of this brought out from North Dakota. West Virginia, taking all sorts of designs. They mention right here, Mount Vernon. You can see the big portico porches on either side of it. Again, things that were reminiscent of the particular states. Down below in the bottom, it mentions how the ironwork all came out of Wheeling, West Virginia, and the material was all built out from there. And the prices are amazing, $220,000. Again, the average person in the country was making peanuts at this point in time. So big dollars by today's amount. This is kind of interesting. It's the amusement area. They had a large exhibit here. This is looking down from the Ferris wheel. And they had all sorts of things that were out here. The Turkish village. They had one thing that was here was a thing called Streets in Cairo. And they had a recreation of Cairo streets. People didn't go there to see the buildings. They went there to see Little Egypt. She was a belly dancer who did a very suggestive shimmying dance. They popularized the song the Coochie Coochie out here at the fair. The fellow that did it put it into the public domain, became very popular. So lots of people came here to see the nighttime entertainment, which was not full nudity like they ended up in a number of other later fairs, but just to actually see a woman dancing with a bare navel was absolutely scandalous in 1893. For people that were from New York, George Tillieu, who was the builder of Steeplechase Park, gave credit to his visit here, seeing it that he would come back and start recreating that environment for the famous Steeplechase Park in New York. And for those of us that were lucky enough to have visited Steeplechase in its heyday before Donald Trump's father tore it down, we thank Mr. Tillieu and glad that he got his inspiration here. So this was, again, very popular area. It was also one of the more popular areas at night because a lot of these places did serve alcohol and people could come in and enjoy themselves. There weren't a lot of amusement rides. That was not a big thing at that point in time. So you don't see a lot of roller coasters and things like that. We've seen it at other fairs, but there were a lot of exhibits and things that kept people entertained. Jump to the next of these brochures or magazines. Again, the Grand Basin, kind of a quiet day here, not absolutely jammed with people. Some pictures, the crowds are just mind-boggling, the size of them. Again, mentioned mining, huge industry at that point in time. So I got a kick out of the fact that rather than if I was doing a build about mining, I probably would have gone for a very steel-looking exterior and tout the use of steel and everything and why you'd come and mine it. This was done in the same general style as the rest of it, in the white facade. But you can see all the ornamentation that the white rabbits were so instrumental in getting these buildings done at the final days. The newspaper accounts at the time talked about how they didn't think they'd be done, and they barely got the scaffolding off of some of these in time to get them open. Art Building, as mentioned, was the only fireproof building at the fair. Uh, I don't have a lot of information available on what was there in terms of notable works of art. It's on my pile of things to be researched. More of the railroad, New York Central Railroad was an amazing railroad at the time. Ran all throughout, although the name New York, it ran all up and down the East Coast, and was an absolute giant of its time. Just all gone today. Now we're finally getting into some of the international stuff. As I mentioned, this was the first fair where the nations were encouraged to build their own particular exhibits. This came from Ceylon. It was you would go in and they would give you a sample of tea, and they were trying to show you how their tea was just as good as the tea that you might get from China and Japan. So this was done with materials harvested overseas, brought here, assembled by craftsmen from Ceylon, and then staffed during the 6 months of the fair by people from there. Agricultural building, again, some of these we've seen before. The photographers seem to favor certain looks, and again, a closer look at the same. One thing you'll notice, everybody is very formally dressed. The men are all in suits. The women are in very heavy dresses reaching down to their ankles. Going to the World's Fair in the middle of this summer heat and humidity in Chicago must have been a very interesting experience. And I'm sure there were a lot of people that were very glad to get back to their hotels and unbutton their cellulite collars and get out of their heavy skirts and petticoats. German building was done to look like a town hall that you'd see in much of Bavaria. The Bavarian style of architecture being very different than northern Germany for those of us that have been over there. But this would not have looked out of place as a town hall throughout many Bavarian villages. To me, this was very interesting. The least interesting building at the fair at all, and you wonder why they couldn't make this particular building more interesting. This was the leather building, and again, it's 2 stories tall of leather making machines, but they actually brought in raw hides in here, and they would go through all the manufacturing process and turn out a pair of shoes or turn out leather material used for horses, reins and saddles and bridles, that sort of thing. So from descriptions at the time, a very noisy, people say also very melodious smelling building because of all the raw materials and hides and everything in there. But I have not found any reason on why they made this building so unattractive compared to the amazingly interesting architecture for so much of the rest of the building. So this again shows you how big an industry leather making was in the United States at this point in time. My Boy Scout camp in the Catskills we've talked about, they were busy deforesting every piece of that property and all throughout the Catskills because the demand for leather gear and the trees, the mectanic acid, the tan, and cure the leather was insatiable throughout this period of time. So leather making was a huge industry throughout the United States. This is an interesting one. We're going inside the horticultural pavilion, and here's a display of California oranges. I'd love to know what they did with this to keep the oranges looking fresh for some period of time. We know that when we're doing one of our Rose Parade floats, Carol and I talked about different things where if you take an orange and cut it in half and you stick it to something, about 3 days later, you're gonna have a very sorry orange stuck to something. So I have no idea what they did for this particular exhibit on how, if they, just like Westinghouse had to constantly change light bulbs, if they came and did anything with the oranges. But here we have a giant tower of California oranges, and then down below other exhibits of farm products and things that you can get from the state. Inside the mining exhibit, again, all sorts of displays down below, all the sorts of minerals and things that you could find. Because again, I mentioned iron ore, but there's many other types of ore and things that obviously are mined. And some of it's mined just for jewelry. It's not all necessarily just for building and that. But again, a great view of how these exhibit halls made such use of giant skylights for natural lighting. More stuff on minerals down below. Colorado made this little thing. We'll see another view of it, another picture. It said the word Colorado, but it was all done out of different rocks and minerals that were coming out of the state. Up above, you have a giant fireplace. In Idaho, we're showing we have all these things that you can come out here: bobcats, owls, and other odds and ends, and all sorts of woods and stone. South Dakota entirely built of muscle, brain material, and money of that state. So very interesting that they acknowledged that money was a very important part. And they also apparently have a temperate zone, and they brought almost all known metals. Evidently, one of the metals they didn't bring was uranium. I guess that was a good thing because uranium being radioactive would probably not be a great display to have people spending a lot of time nearby. Whoops, just skipped over one there. We'll go back. Washington State, again, they mentioned here that this is here, much larger timber had been procured had the railroads been able to carry it. So they covered it all in Puget Sound lumber, wood-made shingles, everything put on here. So giant logs, 52 inches in diameter, 120 feet long, lots of wood. Now this one's interesting for those of us that worked in Epcot. This may look familiar for the Norway Pavilion. This was taken up, built in Norway, brought apart, taken apart, brought over here, put together. What makes this particularly interesting, it's one of the very few surviving structures from the fair. That after the fair was ended, it got sold off to somebody. Let me find my notes right here. It went to several different cities that would put it on display and try to have you come and see the Norwegian Pavilion from the World's Fair, because we have a large Norwegian community. Finally, it fell into disrepair, was taken apart, sent back to Norway. It was restored in Norway by native, Norwegian artisans who had to go and recreate the lost art of how the thing was originally built in 1893 when they restored it 50, 60 years later. And it is still, you can go visit this in Norway today. So it's one of the very few pavilions that survived. Another one that survived was the Maine Pavilion. I don't know if I have a picture of the Maine one in these slides, but somebody liked it so much that rather than have it raised, he took it down and brought it to his estate. He was very wealthy, needless to say. He had it assembled as a private resort for his family to stay in. Over time, it has morphed and is now the Maine Pavilion is a museum in Maine. And there's another one which was called the Dutch House, and I don't have a picture of that today, but somebody liked the Dutch House so much they bought it, took it apart, and it reassembled it, and it still exists today in Brookline, Massachusetts. So when most of the fair burned down, a few people that were very wealthy said, hey, I like that. I'm taking that souvenir home with me. So it's kind of neat to think that somebody today is still living in the Dutch house from the World's Fair. Again, all sorts of stuff with Ben Franklin and others up top, William Penn statues. And I had more of these pictures than I realized, so I'm going to start hopping through them a little quicker. Fisheries Pavilion, again, great beauty. This guy liked it, the grace and delicacy. The other guy in another brochure did not like it. I do not know why. Colorado State Building, if you think of Colorado, of course, what do you think of? Spanish Renaissance style. So why some of these ones that they came up with, I don't know. You can see down below the little thing in front that says Colorado going around. This is kind of interesting. This actual working lighthouse that they built here and showed it here. Lighthouse is still a big industry in the United States at that particular time. They were still building them all over today. A lot of them are museum pieces because so many more navigation systems keep you from going ashore. I got a kick out of this one though. This was relocated after the fair to the Columbia River. So you think about during the time that this thing was at the fair, I guess the federal government said, hey, take your chance on the river. We'll give this to you when we're done. But to me, it's sort of thinking it was needed on the Columbia River. You know, why did you detour to the via the World's Fair? Just kind of interesting thing. So, but this was one of the most powerful electric lights at the time. Again, a lot of these lighthouses beforehand had gone with things like whale oil lamps, and now electricity was becoming a big thing with Fresnel lenses, and they were becoming very popular. Two more pictures. This particular one down at the bottom is very interesting. Oh, at the top, Van Houten and Zoon's Cocoa House. So trying to get people that a couple companies did put in small displays. This was one that was outside of one of the main halls. So the cocoa guys decided that everybody in the United States would like chocolate so much that we would go and put a building here to purely tout our chocolate products. There was one other guy that tried to get a pavilion into the World's Fair and was not able to, and it was Buffalo Bill Cody. He wanted to have a pavilion, and the World's Fair turned him down, so he put a pavilion right outside the main gates of the World's Fair and turned it to be very, very popular. So why they wouldn't let him in, I don't know, but it worked out for him. Down below, it mentions the Roller Chair Company. Again, the fairgrounds were pretty big at 690 acres. And there were people that would put you in a nice chair and roll you around for the day and give you a ride. And their little pagoda-looking building was the headquarters for that. Minnesota, we're taking a look again. Reminds me sort of the New York Pavilion a little bit, the ornamentation stuff. More statues. They had, in some cases, recreated existing statues and brought them out here as copies of them. Others, as I mentioned, were done here and they were real statues, not just copies, relocated back to the sponsor's home state after. And in other cases, they were just temporary ones done for the fair. Ox carts were real popular at that point in time. You mentioned, again, you could go and buy water buffalo, you could buy ox, you could buy all sorts of things. Transportation Pavilion would show you why their ox cart was better than somebody else. Down below, you have a child here wrapped up in, basically it's keeping his feet all nice and safe. He didn't have shoes, but his feet are wrapped in cloth. And he's looking when he gets back to his home near the North Pole. This caption is not as bad as some of the others we'll see in a moment. And Nebraska State Fire Station. This is kind of interesting. Read the caption in this one. They mentioned the number of small conflagrations extinguished was very large. Well, people kept setting fires all over the place. I guess people lighting cigars or whatever, they had issues. They also had a lot of electrical fires because the buildings got overloaded. Electrical wiring was still being, in its infancy. And what unfortunately they did in a number of the buildings was they said, oh, this building turned out to be darker inside than we thought. Let's add some more electric lights. And they started taxing some of the wires which had not been designed to bring that amount of power into that particular building. So they had a lot of problems with electrical fires generated for it. So this was the main fire station. They had some other fire gear stashed around it, but you can see poking out of the door of the firehouse is the horses that would be pulling this at breakneck speed because they didn't have mechanized fire trucks back then. Down below, just a typical booth that you might find if you were going to go and buy lemonade somewhere. This is kind of interesting. They really went way out on finding pictures of people from different countries and portraying them. So this guy here, the handsome Oriental, term we don't use much today, lies around on display at the fair smoking his hookah pipe. They don't bother telling you what's in it, but saying he's been 6 months in his quiet way, picked up a vast store of knowledge, and he goes home more assured than ever. The restful existence awaits him is better than the restless hurry-scurry of the Western lands. So part of your exhibit was to go into one of these pavilions, sorry, frog in my throat, and see the fellows lounging around. And here's a real fringe-worthy one. These fellows from Bohemia, wherever that particular might be, are extremely cruel and brutal race, and we hope that they carry back to their West African homes some of the influence of civilization. They don't particularly look cruel and brutal here. There again, the portrayal of people from some of the overseas territories was pretty reprehensible in these captions. Kansas State, pretty much like the other states. Montana, giant elk statue up at the top, and at the rear of the building is a banquet hall where the hospitable people of Montana constantly entertain their friends. So one would imagine a great amount of drinking occurred. In Louisiana, very interesting thing here. Not a particularly interesting pavilion, but one of the things they did here was they gave out little seedlings of cypress trees, and very popular down in Louisiana. And cypress trees were not really well known across the United States. Well, they gave out so many of these, and people took them back home. They turned out they grew in other areas. I mean, we have a lot of them out here in California. They also ended up growing in places like you wouldn't ever have thought about in the first place, like West Virginia. So there are all sorts of cypress groves across the United States today, and the government credits the Louisiana Pavilion with the free cypress seedlings that you could take home your free souvenir of a cypress tree, plant it in the backyard, and they grow quite wide. So all sorts of people today probably have a souvenir of the World's Fair in their backyard and don't know it, but that was their claim to fame was free cypress seedlings. Real interesting one here, totally different look from some of the other ones. Sweden, mentioned before, the giant window up front, but this giant stonework and everything down below. The bricks were cast over in Sweden, brought over here by ship, and then assembled by Swedish workmen. Again, giant structures. The Manufacturing and Global Arts Building, these things were just huge. Jump to the next one. If I can tab there quick enough. This is a kind of different one that they went with, the Yucatan Pavilion. Rather than design a modern pavilion or anything, this was a recreated ruins of Yucatan Peninsula. I mentioned it's right near the dairy building. I mentioned earlier these things were scattered all over, so you didn't just have all the international ones together. They were just all particular place. So these were these were all done out of paper mache molds that were then covered in concrete so they didn't fall apart in the water. But these were all cast from molds taken from actual ruins in Yucatan. Again, we saw the Ceylon T10 before. The mentioned sign here, you can get it, was only a nickel. This was the main pavilion, so you go and see they were really, really big and trying to sell you lumber. Because again, their woods and everything are totally different than American trees and that. So the tent we saw before was an outback. This was the main pavilion. Oh, I do have a picture of the main pavilion. Okay, great. So this is what the guy decided. He really liked this enough that he was going to take this and make it into his summer house in Maine, and it now exists as a museum in Maine. So I have to find that on my next trip to Maine. I got to see if I make a trip there, but. Kind of a neat thing, and you're rich enough to have that for your summer cottage, huh? Another one of taking pictures of some of the overseas people that came to over here. This one they treated nicely. He's of marked intelligence and commercial astuteness, but he would sit around with his sword and chat with you. Missouri, very ornate building, and inside all sorts of things telling you what you could buy from the state. This is interesting here. You mentioned that the display of women's work. This was, again, women were still being viewed as second-class citizens in many areas. So things like the women's work was a lot of it canning and pruning and stuff like that. But some of the pavilions started to have exhibits of women as architects, business ladies, and sculptors, that sort of thing. Egyptians, this was in the street of Cairo. You could go, and as I mentioned before, you would buy all sorts of Egyptian merchandise, but most people did not go there to get a rug. They went there to see Little Egypt. Turks and Arabs, everybody's sitting around here. Picturesque addition to the cosmopolitan gathering that people the streets of all nations. And they return home laden with American dollars, well pleased with their venture. Dairy building, you can go in and have the excitement of seeing cows milked. And then what they had here, though, was to show you that cows from different countries had different characteristics. Maybe if you were a dairy farmer and you wanted to bring some Swiss cows or Holland cows or others in and mingle them with your herd, you could get the best of the breeding, crossbreeding, and strengthen your thing. So if you were in a state that was a little colder than other states, maybe you would get cows from Switzerland who could take it better than a cow in Kansas. Singalese lady, a big attraction here was that she was allowed to have as many husbands as she wanted. So she's in a happy position of as many suitors as she gets, she can accept them all. And mentioned the fair out on the lake grounds here. So we had previously seen the convent. If you were looking at this, again, much of this is not actually a photograph, but it's an artist's recreation. In the back, the Krupp Pavilion, where the giant cannon was, done as a $500,000 favor to the Kaiser. More of the Mines and Mineral Pavilion. Indian looking out across the state, and across on the other side is a cowboy. And it's again, nice view of the horticultural exhibit. Here you have a giant thing of ferns and plants, but they actually recreated crystal caves that you could go in and see fake stalactites and stalagmites, because they, again, trying to get tourism going in some of these areas, trying to show you some of the natural beauty. So this was a very well received exhibit for people that had never been inside a giant cave. Horticultural pavilion. It's kind of interesting. This building in the background here, you can see up on the top, a kind of darker area, was a children's playground that you could go up on the roof and jump around. And they were very happy that they made note here that there was a netting, wire netting enclosed it and prevented the possibility of a fall to the ground 50 feet below. So if you were at the fair and you didn't want to take Junior with you, and you could put them here, and they could have attendants watch them, and they could play around on the roof of the building up there until you came back for them. Bedouin family on exhibit. The never necessary hookah, which he never ceases to smoke, and a scimitar, which he has not found use for since his arrival, fortunately. You could get a camel ride, and they mentioned how difficult it was to get on these, that they would lurch their feet up off their ground on their feet and topple many people off. Women's building, again, mentioned earlier that it was a big thing for the women's movement coming forward, first sign of progression in the fair, and also the first big, the only real exhibit of Black Americans are participating in other than stereotypical sort of roles. All right, we'll go through a little quicker. Again, artist rendition, the steamboat over here on the side, for whatever reason, is almost all hand drawn. Big boat here in the background. They had a ride that went around here. This was a, what you call it, the loop of the intramural railway. So you would get on this particular train and would take you following around. It was basically, it wasn't a monorail sort of system because it used two tracks. It was the same idea of a monorail for a World's Fair that we know today, where they would cart you around. This is the terminal station. The fair has closed. They're getting ready to close everything down, so you can still see some debris and everything left down. But if you took your trains in on your 26 or whatever tracks that have brought you in here. Rhode Island building. Mentioned some of the international pavilion or the international nations had their own one. France, I think, had the largest of the international exhibits. And here's for Carlos and other people in Connecticut. Lots of statues in that area. This little bridge going over giant elks on either side. People from Java came over here. There's hope that the look is only caused by the embarrassment of being photographed, and that he may prove a cheerful spirit of a happy couple. They don't look particularly happy, do they? This was interesting. The battleship Illinois is supposed to be a replica of a genuine battleship of the time. It's a building. It was all built just with water coming up to it, but they basically built it to the same size and scale of a real battleship. The U.S. government didn't have any extra battleships to loan, but they had sailors going out there, and they would show you how they train out there, and they would man the ship and run to their battle stations and launch lifeboats and that sort of thing. So it was interesting to look at when you get over there. It was a building, not a real ship. More of the electrical building. White Horse Inn came out of England, so you can go in and get a recreation of a giant English pub. As it mentions here, this was done in recreation of the inns that you would stay at when stagecoaches took you around England, put out of business by the modern railway system. Brazil, very interesting pavilion that they had. Again, very interesting that they had 46 different countries exhibit, so it was very good international presence to it. More people out of Bedouin and out of Singhalese. Wisconsin, pretty good sized pavilion for a state with not a lot of inhabitants in it in 1893. Virginia, it looks very much like somebody made a copy of Mount Vernon here and took it out there to Chicago. This peristyle ran at one end of the lagoon there, and lots of statues. But just look at all the ornamentation up at the roof of this, the amount of money spent in these architectural details. And we'll go get the next one. Whoops. Okay, there we go. Back full screen. Here we go. Pals. Again, looking down from the Ferris wheel, we saw some of the amusement area before. This is a closer view of it, so you can see down below. You can see lots of things for the exotic areas of Hawaii. And they had a fake volcano that would go off inside. Things about Pele, the goddess of fire. They had a Chinese theater, different villages that you could go in and go. So over here was Old Vienna. So he had an Austrian village. Giant pavilion here to see livestock on display. And again, this was a huge industry in the United States that particular time. You know, cattle, horses, we mentioned before, ox, water buffalo, that sort of thing. So they would both exhibit these here, but also have giant shows of putting them on display and live auctions that were occurred. Totem poles from Alaska. Exact copy of Cleopatra's Needle, which is in Central Park. Then we have Benjamin Franklin. He was well honored. He's here at the Electricity Pavilion because he's standing here with his kite, and he was also seen earlier at the Pennsylvania Pavilion. So he was a big guy. Michigan, big tower here, very impressive design, all sorts of things with Michigan pine shingles and stone brought in. Here inside the New York Pavilion, you can see how ornate these pavilions were inside. A picture like this had to be a real effort to take. It'd be a real time-lapse photography because, again, of the film. So there's not a lot of really great interior shots in some of these albums because of the lighting. But again, look at the amount of work that they did just to decorate those columns. Samoan actors, they gave a show there in the Midway, and they were here by the aid of a flashlight that were photographed. Again, being a big issue to get it done, so they had to sit very still if somebody shined the light on them to get the picture done. You could get soda, you get lemonade, you get hard cider, all sorts of things. So there are two different ways to get snacks. More fun buildings. Again, some of these statues, it's such a shame that they did not survive. Now we saw the Japanese bride and bridegroom before. He wasn't smiling then, and he's not smiling now. So, why they felt that if they're only doing 14 of these albums, that this guy needed to be in 2 of them, you just never know. Tunisia, French colonies. So again, France had a huge exhibit of its own. But France also had a tremendous number of colonies overseas and exhibited those there. Interesting clock tower inside. Again, you want a clock tower for your town, we'll be glad to go and sell you a clock tower. I don't want to tie up everybody's entire day, so let me skip to the last of these. There, let's see. So again, villages, they became popular at other World's Fairs. Mentioned in Chicago, the World's Fair there was very popular as village. And that's what they would do. They would recreate these things. It was an admission fee to go to each of these. And you could come in and enjoy genuine Irish foods, beverages, buy Irish products, that sort of thing. And the villages became very popular in their reception. Another statue outside the transportation pavilion. Mention the colonnade. This is part of the fisheries pavilion. Again, just all the work up here on the top of these columns is just kind of remarkable. More transportation. Merchant Tailors Pavilion. So you would go and see what you could get and have clothes made for you, because just buying fabric is one thing, but there's enough companies who would now start getting the pre-made clothes, and you could sell those in your stores and come out here and see what they had available for you. And it's a replica of the Liberty Bell. It is not the real Magilla. Actually, let's see. I don't think it was the real one. So it's go out day and night. I thought it was a replica. This one may be. I'll have to look that up. Or maybe one of the folks that know more about this can fill me in on that. Art Palace again survived. It became a museum after the fair, and you can still go and visit out there today. There is our Columbian Fountain. And here's a good idea of coming by train. You know, look at all the trains. The 20-something tracks bringing you all in here. You know, the station was absolutely huge. And then they had all sorts of tracks that, you know, trains would come in and unload, and others would be waiting to unload, and then you know, they move it off to a side track so they get the baggage or other materials brought off. So all this built as a totally temporary rail facility and ripped out. We're up at the top of the McKay Spectrorium, which is pretty much the same sort of thing as Ripley's Believe It or Not of its time. You can see the railroad that ran around it, the track just going through the area here. All right, this one definitely says it's a new Liberty Bell. So it might have been more than one Liberty Bell at the fair. And that was this the last page. This tells you that what you're going to see here, and you know, all the photography, engraving, and printing, the work of a master of his art. So I didn't hit them all because I didn't want to bore everybody totally to tears. But hopefully I can see how many things I've made mistakes on. Look at all the chats. So questions, comments, or those that know more about this than I do that would like to fill us in on your thoughts, memories, or corrections as I read through these. If you have anything, just raise your hand or wave frantically and I'll look for you. Beth, yeah, Tesla, Edison, and Westinghouse. It's a interesting. They were in a real battle to go through, you know, AC current versus DC current, and they got in a situation where they were trying to show you how deadly AC current was. So they actually hooked up a poor elephant to AC current and fried him alive on the spot, which Edison made a movie of. It's pretty horrific. Thought that somebody would do that sort of thing today. But there was a big war going, and they had pretty much just by the time of this World's Fair decided that AC current was a more economical and a safer way to distribute it for long distances for things like city lighting and that. So that's where, again, it was a huge thing. Westinghouse did not originally intend to be a major exhibitor at the fair. Their thought was that they would sell their equipment to whoever was going to be the electrical company for the fair. And then GE came in with a giant bid I forget how much it was, that they were going to be the company for it. And Westinghouse said, we're not going to lose to GE. So they put in a bid. And as I mentioned, they underbid it by 70% per light bulb. GE actually had a better, more efficient design of a light bulb at that time, but they had patented. So they had to come up with a different design for the Westinghouse light bulbs, which they were still working to get the bugs out when the fair opened, and they wore out much faster than the GE light bulbs would have. But it really helped put Westinghouse on the map because the it was so well received, and people talk about how this thing was lit up at night, just shining like an island off to the side of Chicago, and just I guess the glow could be seen from quite an area. So yeah, Edison, Westinghouse, Tesla, some very interesting personalities there. So Derek said the train on display, the Deepwood Clinton, was a replica of the original. It is now at the Henry Ford Museum. Yeah, I didn't think that one was the real one. I knew that the John Bull was. And Palace of Fine Arts lived beyond the fair, became the first home of Chicago's Field Museum. And yes, the museum did relocate later. Mainstay Pavilion is part of the Poland Spring Company complex. So that's interesting to know. So I'm going to have to look that up and go and buy a bottle of Poland Spring water and celebrate the pavilion. And great, Smithsonian, I had an 1881 Arts and Industry Museum open until 2004. Some was similar to displays. Yeah, Columbia. And it's supposed to reopen and reimagine in 2021. Great. Well, Bill, you said you studied all this. Bill, or any comments, observations, and please be kind for all my mistakes.
Oh no, the main thing was interesting is, you talk about the whole fair being done in a Beaux Arts style. At the time, it was decided by the primary architects and the developers that that's what they would adhere to, and they developed, like, you see a lot of consistency. They established elevations, they established the color, they established the proportions of certain things, and then everybody who was participating followed those standards. That's why there's such a consistent look to it. But there was a lot of animosity that what they were doing, this Beaux Arts style, was ancient at that point. And most World's Fairs are usually seen as an advancement of architecture. This one was very much the opposite. And the one building that was the holdout is the transportation building, which I noticed in the slides, they don't even credit the architect for it. And they talk about how it was kind of garishly painted. Well, that was Louis Sullivan who designed that building, who was Frank Lloyd Wright's mentor. And that is the one building architecturally that's remembered from the fair. So it's really interesting to look at. I mean, the buildings were beautiful and interesting that they were all temporary, but it was quite a step backwards for the field of architecture at the time.
Yeah, it's interesting. One of the things I forgot to mention was the layout of the grounds. Bill was mentioning about these things are not just thrown together. You get design committees. They brought in some famous architects. They also brought in famous landscape people. And the grounds were laid out by Frederick Law Olmsted, the same fellow that was responsible for things like Central Park. So they went through no small effort to bring in top name people. But I can imagine you get some top name people with a head start budding, and there were stories about people getting fired, and how much was this one's guy's work, and how much was that one's work, and people resigning in protest off the design committee, and then some came back, but some never did. So lots of politics going on behind the scenes to get this done. Anyone else? Any thoughts? I mean, again, I would have loved to have seen this fair. The size of it. Oh, Wayne, you got something? Go ahead.
Yeah, you talked about the display of California oranges, and one of the things about having themed pavilions for industry and agriculture was that many of the states had to mount multiple exhibits. They had their own state building, and then they had exhibits in the theme buildings. And I know California had at least 3 of those mass orange displays in different buildings.
Yeah, again, I'd like to know how they did it, how they made them last. You know, they found some preservative or something. Because any one of us, if you take an orange and stick it on your kitchen counter and go back and see what it looks like 6 months from now, it's not going to look real good. So you figure they had to pick them, bring them all the way, out from, California, put them up there, and I think they must have, like I said, periodically gone in and redone it. That's the only way I could imagine it. They weren't even the way of getting plastic oranges or fruit at the time.
Yeah. Another thing you mentioned was electrical fires. And there's a book that a reprint. It was published shortly after or during the fair about electricity at the fair. And apparently there was one proprietary insulating substance that actually worked, and a lot of ones that didn't work well. And I can't remember the name of it, but the trade name was became a common word at the time. Instead of saying insulating, you would use the company name. And,
Bakelite by any chance?
pardon?
Bakelite by any chance?
No, it wasn't Bakelite. It was a term I've never heard before, and right now I can't recall it. But it's interesting that the industry was in a crude developmental state for a lot of these things.
Yeah, as I said, lucky that, it's unfortunate the whole thing burned down, after the fair closed. But, given what we know now, it's just lucky it didn't burn down when the damn thing was open. Because if you look at vintage newspapers, the fire department was very busy. You figure that we saw the picture of the horse-drawn wagon. Those horses probably worked a lot. Because just different things that, burn out here, burn out there. And some of the exhibits also, some of the machinery and that, I guess they found out the mean time between failure was less than they anticipated. So sometimes some of the exhibits would, as they're clunking away, start throwing off smoke and that. So it was, just thank God it didn't burn down. Like, it's happened to other things. We've had different fires, at different World's Fairs. This fire was enough. It really pretty much raised the whole site when it went.
Yeah, one more thing, the GE patent that caused such trouble for Westinghouse was actually the screw base, which we're very familiar with light bulbs today. You wouldn't even think of that today, but that was patented and nobody else could use a screw base.
Yeah, they also said it was also the design of the glass dome. They said that was one of the things that drove Westinghouse crazy, was that they had to come up with the way that GE cast the bulbs was very efficient, but Westinghouse had to do something where they cast them with a wood stopper that they had to pull out and fill in that piece of it. So rather than having a very nice uniform piece of glass that every one of them was identical, the Westinghouse bulbs all tended to be just a little different than the one sitting next to it. So as a result, some lasted longer, some, others. But they do describe that they had to hire, the word in the thing I saw was a veritable army of light bulb changers. So we know for, us Disney folks, how many people go down Main Street at night changing light bulbs when they go out. You can imagine, that particularly in some of these buildings, when you saw the heights of some of them, they probably didn't have scissor jacks or things that go up. There's probably some people in some very tall, very scary ladders changing light bulbs there. It's a fascinating fair. I mean, like I said, I knew most about it before, and Carol's read the book, and we've talked about The Devil in the White City, which I've always been a little scared of because Holmes was the guy that did all the killing that. That's also the name on my mother's side of the family. So I'm just hoping as I do my genealogy, I don't find a match there. But, so many people went to Chicago, and it was a major thing in 1893 to get to Chicago was not inconsequential. So the fact that it drew 27 million visitors was a resounding success. I think they said they made $1.5 million profit at the time that this thing was done, and it really helped put Chicago on the map. It did make the message. It helped deliver the message that the city was back from the fire and the danger, and the city appreciated so much what it did that it actually commemorated on one of the stars on the Chicago city flag represents the contribution of the World Columbian Exposition. If you go and do some research on it, one of the things you might want to look at is the ticket things that were done for this fair. The engraving work in the tickets, I don't have a picture here to pop up right now, absolutely astonishing. I mean, the tickets are just works of art on their own. My college roommate's father had a collection of tickets that his family had left over, and I can never understand why people have tickets left over from a World's Fair, why you just don't go one last time. But when you see the work in the tickets, absolutely phenomenal. It was also a very popular series of the United States postage stamps that were put out to commemorate the event. I think one thing said it was the first commemorative stamp that the states had done. I read that, I haven't verified it, but it was a huge thing. We talked at the beginning, Beth has the big book, I have the big book. There were a number of books that were put out. Like I said, it became a very treasured thing in a lot of families to have the book of the World's Fair. Even for people that didn't get to go there, you could vicariously live through the books. But there were the companies. Let me just pop up real quick. I have one other company. Let me find this here real quick, just to show you that there were competitions here. So let me just share my screen real quick. You had other companies here. This is the Warner Company out of Chicago. And again, they did the same sort of thing here. They put out the brochure. Here's part one, portfolio photographs of the World's Fair, published weekly. And again, you subscribe to these, $25 a year, pretty much the same thing. Introduction here. The cover of these things, again, very brittle. But when you get into the paperwork, they very high quality paper, and this looks very similar in style again to the looks of the one we had just gone through. What's interesting is I've gone through both of them. I've not found any similar pictures that they used. So I don't know if they had what you call it, different photographers, if they had different licensing or how they did it. But there were two different ways that you could collect these things with a thing. For $25, you got week after week after week, and the mail came thing, and they're pretty good size. They're yay big by yay big. They're not. I mean, matter of fact, the pictures are so big they won't fit on one of my scanners. I had to put them on another one. So they're really great that they survived so much over a period of time. Oh, and Yuko and Dennis are confirming they were the first commemorative stamps. Great. I didn't know you collect stamps. We want to have stamp collection sometime. I have a whole bunch of the ones from this particular fair. So yeah, the Columbian stamps are just great, and some of them are very expensive too. So you probably have better ones than I have. Well, I thank folks for joining, and I hope everybody has any other questions, comments, or anybody have a time machine can go visit it. I mean, it's a fascinating fair for the size of it. I mean, you look at the size of those exhibit halls, they were just massive. And I cannot imagine how many hours it would take to go through it. And I imagine it was probably pretty boring, particularly for kids, to go and see leather being made or electric generators and that sort of thing. But it was, there was not, it was certainly in this particular fair, you didn't have anything like, the Small World or lots of entertainment. It was a very industrial fair, but that's what World's Fairs were back then. It was a way of showing how your country or your city was better than others. And, they have the whole set in mint and a bank safe. Okay, mine are sitting behind me. And it's, but my stuff is probably equally as safe as yours, because for somebody to come into here and find it, good luck to them. I have 50 years worth of stamps on a shelf back here, and some of them are sorted out, and others are giant piles of stuff. So, in my retirement days, my work in my stamp collection is always on my to-do list, and I can see it. It ain't gonna happen in the near future. So, but next week I think we may go either to Expo 70 in Osaka, or we may go to the Okinawa World's Fair, which was really off the beaten path. It's an example of how you want to build a World's Fair that nobody could go to. You build it in Okinawa. But I'll come up with the theme and put it on the schedule and send out the email to everybody. So appreciate you joining us and hope you had a good time. Thanks, Bill, for joining us. You mentioned you just retired recently.
Yeah, I was there. Well, I was there during Epcot, and then I came back in '89, and I just retired in this last December.
Oh, congratulations! Another mouse survivor.
Exactly.
Do you get Debbie Del Mar's alumni newsletter?
Oh yeah.
Okay, great. Because she's just trying to get our lunches together, hoping starting in October we can all meet up in person someday. And Glenn, how many grandkids do you have now?
Well, we have 3, including the new one.
Well, and you look too young for 3.
Yeah. And you know, asked about that horse. I looked him up. I found out he just came for the main event.
Oh, I didn't think you'd let me down. I was mainly disappointed that you would not.
Yeah, I didn't want to stir up too much trouble.
Oh, goodness gracious. I'm sure I could think, I have a friend, my friend Mark Shigaris, he can come up with a pun for everything, absolutely anything on the spot. And sometimes going to lunch with him can become very painful. So I'll have to someday put you and him in touch and see which of you can come out and survive.
Well, Kevin Rafferty's the one you don't want to get in a pun war with. You know Kevin, right?
Yeah, just at a distance. I don't know him well enough.
Okay.
Well, great. And thanks everybody for joining. This will be up on YouTube. And then again, hope to see you all next week. And with the heat wave going across the country, I hope you cool off. And Jim, I hope you saw enough water to at least give you the illusion of coolness. So thanks all, and we will see you in a week's time. Take care. Bye.